The morning sun filtered weakly through the curtains, pale gold brushing the edges of the room. Emilia opened her eyes with a start, the smell of polished wood and old paper curling around her senses. She blinked, disoriented, memories rushing in like a broken dam. This wasn't her apartment abroad, not the quiet life she had fought to build. She was back in the exact moment she had once dreaded, standing in the grand, cold hall of the family estate, where her parents confronted Lucas, the boy who had once been their pride, the math prodigy they had sponsored from the moment they recognized his brilliance. In her previous life, she had been reckless, too kind in the wrong ways. She remembered every detail, the way she had bribed his girlfriend, Maya, to leave the country to save his future, thinking she was protecting him. She had meant well. But her interference had earned her Lucas's undying hatred. And when her family fell into ruin shortly after, he had kicked her when she was already bleeding. Not literally, but in ways that mattered: the public humiliation, the betrayal, the final severing of their bond. Emilia forced herself to steady her breathing. Her past self had been impulsive, ruled by guilt and obligation. This time, she vowed silently, she would act differently. She would honor the unspoken wish she had heard in Lucas's dying glare from the past, that she should stay out of his life. And yet, watching him now defiant, proud, unbending, her chest ached. He looked older, taller than she remembered, and the raw confidence in his posture was intoxicating. Even after everything, he had become the man everyone had expected him to be. Her parents' voices cut sharply through the thick air of the hall. "Lucas, you need to consider this opportunity seriously," her father said, a note of desperation hidden under his calm exterior. "This scholarship could change your life, your career, your entire future." Lucas's jaw tightened. His gaze swung toward Emilia, a flicker of recognition and resentment in his eyes. He didn't soften. He never had. "I appreciate your concern, sir," he said smoothly, his voice carrying the subtle arrogance of someone who had been adored for his talent. "But I have made my choice." Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line, and her fingers curled around the edge of her silk scarf. "But Lucas, this is what we've worked for all these years. We've supported you, funded your studies. Are you truly willing to throw it all away for what? A fleeting attachment?" Lucas looked at her, then past her, and then back to her parents, and she saw it, the same stubborn pride, the same refusal to bend, that had marked every challenge he had faced in their shared childhood. "I love Maya," he said finally, his tone quiet but firm. "And I will stay in China. I will carve my own path." A sigh escaped her lips, barely audible. Her parents looked at her in shock, and she let herself step forward slightly, her expression calm, almost placid. "I support his decision," she said softly, letting the words hang in the air. Her voice was deliberate, measured, careful. It was nothing like the pleading tone she remembered using in her past life, nothing like the frantic attempts to control his destiny. Her parents stared at her, aghast. "Emilia, what are you saying?" her father demanded. "That Lucas is capable of making his own choices," she replied. There was no warmth in her words, but there was no malice either. "And whatever path he chooses, it is not my place to interfere this time." Her mother's face twisted in disbelief, and her father's jaw clenched, but Lucas's eyes softened ever so slightly. There was a flicker of relief there, perhaps mixed with confusion. He had not expected her to stand aside so quietly, to not try to manipulate the situation as she had in the past. The room fell silent for a moment, broken only by the faint rustle of the heavy curtains as a breeze slipped through the window. Emilia felt a strange detachment, as if watching a play unfold from the wings, rather than being its center. And yet, inside, a quiet storm churned. Watching Lucas make a choice that she had once fought so hard to control was painful, but it was a necessary pain, a cleansing, almost, for the years of regret she carried in this reborn life. Her parents' voices rose again, pleading, reasoning, insisting. But she stayed silent, her arms folded, observing the subtle shift in Lucas's posture as he remained resolute. He wasn't flinching this time, wasn't begging for approval, and she recognized that in his pride, in his stubbornness, there was a beauty of a kind, messy, human, and untamed. For a moment, memories flickered like lightning through her mind. She remembered their childhood, the nights spent huddled over math problems, their laughter echoing in the dim corners of the study room. She remembered the scrawny boy with the wild hair, the one she had once defended from bullies, the one she had once thought of almost like a brother. She remembered believing, truly believing, that she could guide him, shape him, protect him. And she remembered how quickly that trust had burned, leaving nothing but ash and regret. Now, she had a chance to do things differently. No interference. No bribes. No desperate attempts to control another person's destiny. She could let him stumble, fall, and rise or fail on his own. And as she watched him, she realized that part of letting go meant freeing herself, too. Lucas turned to leave, his steps measured, deliberate, and Emilia felt a pang of, not loss exactly, but a bitter, sharp twist of nostalgia. The boy she had loved, in her own complicated, tangled way, was gone. In his place stood a man, and he had no need of her intervention. She wondered, briefly, if he would ever forgive her or if she deserved forgiveness at all. But there would be time for reflection later. Right now, she needed to reclaim herself, to step out of the shadow of past mistakes and into a future she could finally control. As Lucas's figure disappeared down the corridor, Emilia felt the first stirrings of a strange liberation. The bitterness that had once consumed her was tempered by clarity, and for the first time in years, she could breathe without the weight of obligation pressing down on her chest. The game had changed, the rules were hers to set, and for once, she could watch someone she had loved from the sidelines without fear, without manipulation, and without regret. It was a small victory, perhaps, but it felt monumental. And somewhere deep in her chest, she knew this was just the beginning. Emilia closed her eyes and let the memory take her back, to the dusty streets of her childhood home, where the air smelled of old stone and spring blossoms. She could see him clearly, Lucas, the scrawny boy with a shock of unruly black hair and eyes too sharp for a 10-year-old. He had arrived at her doorstep one rainy afternoon, drenched, clutching a battered notebook, with nothing but a thin jacket and an expression that screamed hunger for knowledge, yes, but also for recognition, for someone to see him for who he was. Her parents had been proud of their generosity. They brought him into their home with the usual air of benevolence, offering warmth, meals, a chance to shine. But Emilia remembered the first time she had looked at him hesitant, skeptical. Children could be cruel, and the world had not been kind to him. He flinched at sudden movement, recoiled from laughter that wasn't gentle, and yet, beneath that fragility, there was something magnetic, almost dangerous. "He's different," she had whispered to her mother, clutching her doll a little too tightly. "Different isn't bad, Emilia," her mother replied, smoothing the folds of her dress. "He just needs someone to guide him." And so she did. In those early days, Emilia had taken on the role of protector almost instinctively. When the neighborhood boys jeered at Lucas for wearing patched shoes or when they mocked his thin frame, she had been the first to step between them and him, her small fists raised and voice sharp. She had done it without thought, without strategy, only with the blunt force of loyalty. He had stared at her then, a mixture of awe and embarrassment, and in that moment, a bond formed, a bond neither of them fully understood yet. School had been another battlefield. Lucas was brilliant, yes, but chaotic. His mind moved in directions no one else could follow, and his grades initially reflected it. He was a storm trapped in a classroom, a mind too sharp to fit into a neat system. Emilia, on the other hand, thrived on structure. She adored numbers and patterns and equations that bent the universe to her will. It had been natural, almost inevitable, that they would collide and then align. She helped him, not with pity, but with an understanding that had nothing to do with charity. Hours were spent bent over notebooks, pencils scratching furiously, laughter echoing through empty hallways as they argued over proofs, challenged each other, pushed each other. For Emilia, it had felt like the start of something unbreakable. For Lucas, she could see the gratitude, sometimes hidden behind pride, that someone believed in him. And yet, even in those golden days, there were shadows she didn't notice. The way Lucas's eyes lingered too long on a problem when it didn't go his way. The flicker of anger when he lost to her, which was rare, but there nonetheless. He had always been brilliant, but there had been a darkness to his intelligence, a kind of ruthlessness that even a child could not yet articulate. Emilia had seen it and dismissed it, thinking it was merely passion, ambition, hunger to rise above the poverty that had defined his early life. By the time they reached middle school, their dynamic had evolved. They were partners in every sense, academic rivals, yes, but also confidants. She had teased him mercilessly, and he had returned the favor, but always with a smirk that suggested a mutual respect beneath the jesting. When teachers assigned projects, they sought each other out. When exams loomed, they stayed up late, quizzing and arguing and dreaming together. They spoke often of a future where they would change the world, where equations and theories could bend reality to their will. But childhood loyalty is fragile, and the first cracks had appeared subtly, like hairline fractures in glass. Lucas had begun to pull away in small ways, hiding his frustration when he failed, reacting with sharp words when she tried to help. Emilia had noticed, of course, but she had convinced herself it was merely adolescence, that the bond they had forged was strong enough to weather anything. Still, there had been moments fleeting, almost imperceptible, that hinted at something more complicated. She remembered the time he stayed up all night solving a particularly vexing problem and didn't tell her, only to smirk the next morning when he revealed the solution. She had laughed, but inside, a pang of worry had tugged at her heart. Was he growing distant? Was their closeness only as strong as convenience allowed? High school brought both closeness and new turbulence. The world outside their small bubble had grown louder and more competitive. New students arrived, new faces that promised distraction, new temptations. And then, of course, there was Maya. Emilia remembered the first time she saw her, a whirl of color and movement on the dance floor, vibrant and alive in a way that made Lucas's eyes light up. At first, Emilia had smiled, genuinely, thinking perhaps this girl could bring joy into his life without threatening the bond they shared. But she had quickly learned the danger of letting someone else occupy that space. The way Lucas's gaze lingered, the way he started staying up late, skipping homework, losing himself in her laughter instead of equations. It had felt like betrayal, but a slow, creeping one, almost imperceptible until it was too late. And yet, in the shadow of that growing tension, Emilia had not yet understood the depth of her own attachment. She had defended him for years, yes, but in her heart, she had thought she was acting out of love for him as a friend, as a fellow traveler in a world they had chosen together. It had never occurred to her that she was entwined with his destiny in ways neither of them could see, that her loyalty was about more than kindness, it was about the way she had mapped her life around his existence. Looking back now, Emilia realized that loyalty is not always noble. Sometimes, it is blind. Sometimes, it binds you not to another, but to a version of yourself that refuses to grow. And in her past life, that blind loyalty had been the spark that ignited everything: betrayal, resentment, tragedy. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, staring out the window at the morning light glinting off the courtyard below. Lucas's figure would enter her life again soon, and she had a chance this time to navigate it differently. But she also knew something else, something she had not fully acknowledged until now. The boy she had defended, the boy she had loved in a quiet, protective way, was already changing. The future they had dreamed together was fragile, and the path she had once chosen to force him onto had been built on illusions. She would not make the same mistake again. She would observe. She would learn. And when the time came, she would act not out of blind loyalty, but out of calculated, deliberate choice. For now, she let herself linger in the memory, allowing the ache of nostalgia and the bitter twinge of regret to settle deep into her chest. Every shared laugh, every late-night study session, every small victory and defeat, they were all pieces of the map that had led her here. And she would need them, every one, to navigate the treacherous road ahead. Because even though Lucas had been a friend, a rival, a brother in all but name, she was beginning to see the truth in a way she hadn't before. He was capable of betrayal. He was capable of cruelty. And she could no longer afford to let her heart blind her to the storm gathering just beyond the horizon. The spring sunlight spilled through the windows of the school library, warm and golden, catching the dust motes in the air. Emilia sat hunched over a stack of math textbooks, her fingers tapping nervously against the polished wood. For the first time in weeks, she hadn't heard Lucas's voice echoing from the corner of the room, the way it used to, sharp and teasing, full of energy that made even the most tedious formulas seem alive. She had expected him to be there, as he always was, scribbling numbers with that wild precision only he could manage, muttering to himself when he got stuck, and somehow making her laugh even when she wanted to scream. But now, the corner was empty, and the silence felt unnaturally heavy. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Maya. Emilia felt her stomach tighten, a knot of unease forming. Lucas is late again. We're meeting for lunch. Don't wait up. Emilia's hands went cold. She had seen the way Lucas's priorities had shifted, noticed the way his eyes lit up when Maya entered the room, how his laughter became louder, more animated when she was around. And yet, she had hoped he would still remember, even for a moment, that the dreams they had shared mattered too. Later that afternoon, she found him outside the art studio, leaning lazily against the wall with Maya, his arms draped over her shoulders. They laughed, heads thrown back, oblivious to the world around them. Lucas's eyes, once bright with calculation and ambition, now seemed softer, distracted, intoxicated by her presence. Emilia's chest tightened, a sharp, painful twist. She wanted to call out, to remind him of the promises they had made to each other, of the nights spent in shared study, of the countless hours sacrificed to chasing a future that once belonged to both of them. But her voice faltered. The words felt brittle on her tongue. Finally, she approached, careful to keep her expression neutral, the calm mask she had perfected over years of observation. "Lucas," she said, voice even. He turned, startled for a moment, then smiled lazily. "Emilia. You're here," he said, and for a second, she almost believed he was genuinely happy to see her. But then she caught the way his gaze flicked to Maya, and the truth hit her like a cold wave. She wasn't the one he wanted to see. She had never been the one he wanted to see. "I thought we could study together," she said softly, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Lucas's expression shifted. There was something distant, almost dismissive, in the way he replied. "I'm busy. Maya and I have plans." The words were innocuous enough, but they cut deeper than any insult. Emilia felt her stomach drop. Plans. Not work, not study, but plans. With Maya. Her chest ached with a mixture of anger and heartbreak, the realization settling in like ice. He had stopped seeing her as a partner, a friend, even a sibling in all but name. She was irrelevant. She tried again, pushing her voice a little higher, sharper. "Lucas, you promised. We talked about this, you said we'd get through this year together. Our college exams, the competitions, our future." He looked at her, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of guilt, a hesitation. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "Emilia, that's the past," he said, shrugging, his voice casual, too casual. "Things change. I'm focused on the present now." The present. Maya. Her chest tightened further. "And what about our dreams?" she demanded, her hands clenching into fists. "All those nights we stayed up late, all those calculations, all those promises? Did they mean nothing to you?" Lucas's expression hardened. "We're not that close anymore, Emilia. I have other priorities." The words hit her like a physical blow. Not a whisper of regret, not a trace of apology. Just a dismissal. The boy she had loved in a quiet, complicated way, the boy she had defended, studied with, laughed with, the one she had believed she could always rely on, he was gone. Emilia's throat tightened, and she took a step back, forcing herself to breathe. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile the Lucas she had grown up with, the prodigy who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with her in endless nights of math battles, with this version, distracted, indifferent, infatuated. And yet, even in her hurt, she recognized a truth that had been forming quietly over the past months. This wasn't just about Maya. Lucas had changed. He had allowed himself to be consumed by fleeting joy, by charm and distraction, abandoning the discipline that had once defined him. The cracks were not merely in their friendship, they were in him. She turned to leave, her steps deliberate, her chest tight with unspoken words and unshed tears. She had one last look at him, at the boy who had once been her closest ally. "I hope you remember what really matters, Lucas," she said quietly, almost to herself. He barely looked at her as he walked away, hand in Maya's, laughter ringing out across the courtyard. Emilia felt a mix of grief and rage, a bitter cocktail that settled deep into her bones. She had tried, once again, to reach him, to remind him of the dreams they had built together. And once again, he had chosen another path, another person, leaving her in the cold shadow of his ambition, or perhaps his recklessness. In the solitude of the library later that evening, she buried herself in equations, trying to will the pain away, but the numbers blurred as her mind replayed the scene outside the art studio. Each sum, each formula, reminded her of the order she craved in a world that had suddenly become chaotic. Lucas's defection to a world of carefree indulgence was more than a betrayal, it was a challenge. And one she silently vowed she would meet, not by pleading, not by bribery, but by sheer determination, by becoming someone unassailable, someone he could never undermine. Her fingers trembled slightly as she wrote, her pencil scratching across the paper. For the first time, she understood the stark reality: some people could not be saved, no matter how fiercely you believed in them. Some people, even those you loved most, would choose a path that left you behind. Emilia clenched her jaw and closed the notebook with a decisive snap. She had lost him for now, at least. But she would not lose herself. She would rise. And when the time came, he would see exactly what he had thrown away. The months before the college entrance exams were a blur of sunlight and rain, of library walls and midnight lamplight. Emilia moved through them with a singular purpose, her life reduced to the rhythm of notes, formulas, and deadlines. Each day was a carefully choreographed march toward her goal, a steady drumbeat of focus and discipline. She rarely slept, rarely ate more than a hurried snack, and rarely allowed herself the distraction of anything that wasn't essential. And yet, even in her tunnel vision, the world around her shifted in ways she couldn't ignore. Lucas was different now, no longer the boy she had grown up with, no longer the prodigy whose ambitions had matched hers step for step. He had become untethered. She caught glimpses of him through the hallways or the occasional mutual friend, always with Maya, laughing, careless, a spark of joy lighting his eyes that no one else seemed to see but her. One evening, Emilia arrived at the courtyard near the school's gymnasium, hoping for a quiet walk to clear her mind before yet another night of study. And there they were. Lucas, leaning lazily against the brick wall, arms draped around Maya, talking animatedly. She froze for a moment, heart tightening. His laughter rang out, rich and warm, and it was aimed at her, but not for her. It was for her absence, for her being left behind. He caught her gaze, and for a brief moment, a flicker of recognition passed through his eyes. But it was fleeting. He smirked, almost mischievously, and said something to Maya that made her laugh, throwing her head back in a way that made Emilia flinch. She approached, careful not to let the storm in her chest show on her face. "Lucas," she said, her voice steady, though her throat ached. He turned, eyes narrowing slightly, as if surprised she had the audacity to appear. "Emilia. Didn't expect to see you here." "I thought we could talk," she said, forcing herself to keep her tone even. Lucas shook his head, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Not now. We're busy." He glanced at Maya with an expression she didn't recognize, a mixture of affection and indifference that made something inside Emilia snap. "Busy?" she asked, her voice rising just slightly. "We have less than 6 months before the exams. The exams that determine everything. Your future, my future, our future. We talked about this, Lucas." He sighed, a sound meant to dismiss but failing to mask impatience. "Emilia, we talked. And I told you I've got my priorities." Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with frustration. She wanted to shake him, to make him understand that dreams weren't flexible, weren't disposable, weren't something you could leave behind when someone more exciting came along. She wanted to scream, to plead, to make him remember all the nights they had spent bent over books, the cold library floors, the silent competitions, the moments when they had believed they could change the world together. Instead, she let herself step back. Her pride, tempered by years of careful observation and self-control, forced her to retreat. "I see," she said softly. "I hope you remember what you're risking." He gave her a casual shrug and turned back to Maya, laughter spilling from him like sunlight. The sight should have broken her completely, and for a moment, it did. She felt a hollow ache, a combination of betrayal, loss, and recognition that he was gone, that the boy who had once been her equal, her partner in ambition, had chosen a different path entirely. And yet, as the days stretched into weeks, Emilia found herself hardening, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. If Lucas had abandoned the path they had shared, she could not allow herself to falter. She buried herself in her studies with renewed intensity, waking at dawn to solve equations, reviewing theorems late into the night, her mind a fortress of discipline and concentration. Even in the small moments when her hand brushed against the edge of a pencil, when the library clock chimed midnight, she felt the old pang of longing for the camaraderie they had once shared. But she forced herself to channel that longing into purpose. Each formula mastered, each problem solved, each late night endured without complaint was a tiny victory, a quiet assertion of her independence. And then came the whispers, the subtle reminders of Lucas's descent. Friends she trusted passed along rumors, he skipped crucial study sessions, stayed up all night with Maya, flitted from one distraction to another. Yet occasionally, inexplicably, his grades would climb slightly, just enough to hint that he might salvage something but not enough to threaten the gap growing between them. Emilia frowned, puzzled, but forced herself to focus. She would not speculate, not now, not when her own future hung in the balance. One afternoon, she walked past the art studio and paused at the door, glancing through the glass. There they were again, Lucas and Maya, close, laughing, gesturing animatedly. He was holding her hand this time, and Maya's head rested lightly on his shoulder. He caught her gaze and, with an almost casual cruelty, said, "She's not my childhood sweetheart, Emilia. We're not close." Emilia felt the world tilt. Not the words themselves, they were just words, but the finality, the cold precision of them. He had removed her from his life completely, redefined the past to suit his present. She wanted to respond, to cry out, to confront him with every betrayal, every sleepless night, every shared dream that he had discarded. But she didn't. She couldn't. Instead, she turned on her heel, walking away with measured steps, her chest tight, her throat raw. She buried herself in her own determination, letting the pain fuel her instead of consuming her. Lucas had chosen his path, and she would choose hers. Her dreams would not be deferred by the whims of another person, no matter how much she had once loved him. That evening, she sat alone in the small courtyard behind the library, the fading sunlight painting her hair gold, the cool breeze whispering against her skin. She allowed herself a single, quiet moment of grief, letting the tears fall unbidden. But she did not crumble. Not yet. She breathed deeply, letting the air fill her lungs, and made a promise to herself: she would rise, and she would do so without him. Lucas was slipping further away, yes, but each step she took toward her own future was one he could not influence, one he could not claim. And somewhere deep inside her, a quiet, resolute part of her knew, this was the point at which she truly began to grow. Not as someone's protector, not as someone's confidant, but as her own person, capable of success, capable of triumph, capable of living on her own terms. And if Lucas ever realized what he had thrown away, she would be long gone, unshakable, and utterly free. The day the college entrance exam results were posted, the air in the city seemed unnaturally still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Emilia walked through the familiar streets, her heart steady but her stomach fluttering with anticipation. She had spent countless nights hunched over books, scribbling formulas, reviewing theorems until her eyes ached. Every sleepless hour, every skipped meal, every ounce of energy she had poured into this moment, now it would all be quantified by a single set of numbers on a glowing screen. She arrived at the school's announcement board, where a throng of students had gathered, clutching smartphones and printed forms, whispers and laughter mingling in nervous anticipation. The hum of tension was palpable, a living thing, wrapping around her like a vice. Emilia pushed to the front, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the board as she found her registration number. Her eyes scanned the line of numbers, skipping ahead, and then finally settled. The score stared back at her like a beacon: provincial top scorer. Emilia felt a jolt of triumph ripple through her chest. She had done it. She had achieved the culmination of every dream, every sacrifice, every long night in the library and quiet despair she had endured while Lucas laughed with Maya. And yet, the moment was bittersweet. Across the courtyard, she caught sight of Lucas, his face pale, a rare hesitation in his usually confident posture. His friends whispered behind him, shoulders slumped as he stared at his own result. She knew immediately, without needing to see the numbers closely, that he had failed to secure the success he had taken for granted. The boy who had once been her equal, her partner in ambition, had stumbled spectacularly. Rumors had already begun to circulate: Lucas had missed crucial exams, spent nights in cafes and dormitories with Maya, neglected his studies. His grades were just above the minimum cutoff, enough to scrape into a mediocre university, but far from the brilliance that had once defined him. Emilia felt a pang of, not satisfaction, exactly, but clarity. In her previous life, she would have intervened, bribed, pleaded, done whatever it took to keep him on the path she had once imagined for him. But this time, she did nothing. Her parents approached, eyes wide with a mixture of pride and concern. "Emilia! You've done it! Top scorer," her father exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion. He clutched her shoulders, his usual stoic demeanor cracking in the glow of her triumph. Emilia smiled faintly, grateful but detached. She felt no need for their praise. She had already tasted victory in the quiet of her own mind, but she accepted it nonetheless. Her mother's hands trembled slightly as she brushed a strand of hair from Emilia's face. "And Lucas?" she asked, voice tight, almost hopeful. Emilia hesitated, then chose her words carefully. "He has made his choices," she said, the calm neutrality in her voice a deliberate shield. "He will have to live with them." Her father's brow furrowed. "But, you could use connections, couldn't you? Help him secure a place abroad?" Emilia shook her head, and a quiet, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "No," she said firmly. "I won't interfere. This time, I will let him face the consequences of his own actions." Her parents were silent, but their surprise was evident. They had expected intervention, as they always had in the past. And yet, the old Emilia, the one who had pleaded, bribed, and sacrificed her own comfort for Lucas, was gone. Emilia turned to find Lucas standing not far away, arms crossed, face set in a mask of defiance. He had noticed her resolve, and she could see the recognition flicker in his eyes. He understood, perhaps better than anyone else, that she would not step in to save him. The realization hit him like a cold gust of wind, and for the first time, the proud, untouchable prodigy seemed vulnerable. A few moments later, her parents, unable to mask their concern entirely, approached Lucas. "Son," her father said carefully, "we can still help you. There are opportunities, scholarships abroad, connections through the university." Lucas shook his head, pride and desperation warring in his gaze. And then, in a move that stunned everyone, he lifted his chin and said, voice steady though his hands trembled slightly, "No. I will do this on my own." Emilia felt a strange pang of something almost like respect. The boy who had once clung to her family's influence, the boy who had once thrived on her loyalty, was choosing independence, however misguided. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, painting the streets in golden shadow, Emilia sat quietly in her room. Her phone buzzed with messages of congratulations, but she barely glanced at them. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the day. Lucas's defiance, his struggle, his stubborn pride, all of it was laid bare, and yet she felt no need to intervene. She had tasted freedom from the cycles of guilt and obligation that had haunted her previous life, and it was sweet. She allowed herself a single moment of reflection. Her path was her own now. Lucas's choices were his. And as much as it hurt to see him falter, she understood something vital: success achieved by one's own effort, even when others fail, is a satisfaction no one can take away. The coming weeks would bring new challenges, new tests of patience, and new temptations to interfere. But for now, Emilia sat in quiet triumph, knowing she had passed the first real test of her reborn life. She had let go of control, she had resisted old impulses, and she had allowed fate to run its course without her interference. And somewhere deep inside, a flicker of certainty burned: the game had changed, and this time, she held the power. The autumn wind rattled the shutters of Emilia's room, carrying the sharp chill of early winter and the faint scent of burning leaves from the street below. She sat at her desk, reviewing designs for her portfolio, the soft hum of her lamp the only sound in the quiet apartment. London was nothing like her hometown. The streets buzzed with a constant undercurrent of possibility, of people building futures and making names for themselves. She had arrived determined to create, to claim her own space in the world, and every sketch, every seam, every meticulous calculation of color and fabric brought her closer to that vision. Her phone buzzed insistently. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was a message from a classmate or a notification about an upcoming submission. But when the screen lit up again, the name made her freeze: Lucas. She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers hovered over the screen, a strange mix of anticipation and dread twisting her stomach. She had seen him at a distance in the months since the exams, rumors filtering through friends back home, rumors of failed businesses, of mismanaged opportunities, of nights wasted in pursuit of Maya's whims. And now, he was reaching out directly. With a slow, deliberate motion, she answered. "Lucas," she said, her voice carefully neutral, betraying nothing of the storm inside her. "Emilia, please," he said, desperation threading through his tone. It was a sound she had never heard from him before, raw, vulnerable, pleading. I need your help." She inhaled sharply, gripping her pen like a lifeline. "I'm listening," she said carefully, knowing that every word she chose would matter. I can't get into a good university. My exams. I messed up. I've failed everything. Please, your family, your connections, can you help me?" His words tumbled out, a mixture of fear and pride clashing violently. Emilia felt a strange coldness settle over her. In her previous life, she would have felt guilt, panic, obligation. She would have scrambled to fix the situation, bribed, pleaded, sacrificed herself and her own comfort. But that Emilia was gone. She was not the girl who had once begged the universe to bend in favor of a boy who had never truly valued her loyalty. "I see," she said softly, her voice steady, cutting through the static of his desperation. "You want me to secure your future for you? To fix the consequences of your own choices?" She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Is that correct?" "Yes," he admitted, almost in a whisper. Please, Emilia. I can't do this without you. You've always been the one I could rely on. You're the only one who understands. Stop, she interrupted sharply. Her chest rose and fell, a mixture of anger and disbelief twisting her voice. Do not, for 1 second, pretend that you can twist the past into some narrative where I'm obligated to you. I am not here to rescue you, Lucas. I never was. And I never will be. There was a pause on the other end of the line. She could hear his ragged breathing, the desperate catch in his throat as he tried to process that she would not bend. You can't leave me like this, he snapped finally, a crack of fury breaking through the pleading. I've always known, she said, sharper still, her voice a weapon honed by years of restraint and self-discipline. Do not speak of always, do not speak of loyalty, and do not speak of love. Not to me. The breakfasts you remember from high school, the nights I stayed up, I did not do them for you. They were for someone who deserved them. Someone who valued me as I valued them. Not for you. His silence was thunderous, a vacuum of disbelief and shame. She could almost see him faltering, crumbling in the weight of a truth he had never considered, that the world did not owe him success, that his charm, his talent, his brilliance were meaningless if untempered by effort and decency. I have no more time to waste on your failures, she said finally, her words deliberate, cold but precise. I have my own life to build. And you, she paused, swallowing the emotion that tried to rise. Will face the consequences of your own actions. The line went silent. And in that silence, Emilia felt a strange satisfaction, not cruelty, not triumph, but clarity. She had drawn a line she had never drawn in her past life. She had refused to sacrifice herself again, refused to prop up someone who had discarded her, and refused to bend her moral compass for a boy who had never respected it. She hung up the phone, her hands trembling slightly from adrenaline. The autumn wind pressed against the window pane, as if to remind her that the world was vast, and cold, and full of choices. She felt a strange mix of sorrow and liberation, sorrow for the boy she had once loved in a quiet, protective way, and liberation for the woman she was becoming, someone who acted on principle, not guilt, on clarity, not obligation. Later that night, she stared out at the city lights stretching endlessly across London. Somewhere back home, Lucas was left to navigate the consequences of his own choices, missed opportunities, financial strain, personal failures. And Emilia, for the first time, felt truly free. The weight of her past mistakes, of her blind loyalty, had lifted. She would no longer allow herself to be a pawn in anyone else's story. Somewhere deep in her chest, a quiet voice whispered that this was only the beginning. Lucas's desperation had revealed his true nature, but more importantly, it had revealed hers. She would no longer sacrifice her future for someone who could never value it. She was building her own life now, and no one, not Lucas, not her family, not fate itself, would stand in her way. And as she turned back to her sketches, the hum of the lamp filling the quiet apartment, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. She was finally in control. London had a rhythm all its own, raindrops drumming on cobblestones, buses roaring past, and the distant hum of the city stretching like a living organism across the streets. Emilia moved through it with purpose, her boots clicking against wet stone as she carried her portfolio under her arm, her breath visible in the crisp autumn air. She had arrived in the city with nothing but determination, ambition, and the quiet fire that had been building inside her since the day she had refused Lucas's plea. The city was a test, but Emilia welcomed it. Every morning she walked through the crowded streets to the Fashion Institute, weaving past black taxis, the smell of roasted chestnuts drifting from street vendors, the faint tang of rain mixing with the aroma of brewing coffee from nearby cafes. Each day was an exercise in focus, discipline, and creation. She poured herself into her designs, her sketches flowing with colors and textures that reflected her vision, bold, uncompromising, entirely her own. Her classmates were talented, yes, but none had the fire she carried. She watched them struggle with patterns or fabrics, while she moved through her projects with a precision honed from years of disciplined study. She had learned to trust her instincts, to let her creativity flourish without the constant shadow of doubt that had plagued her in her past life. And for the first time, success felt like something she had earned entirely on her own. It was during one late evening at the institute, the studio quiet save for the hum of sewing machines and the scratch of pencils against paper, that she met Ben. He was sitting at the far end of the workspace, quietly sketching with a calm precision that immediately drew her attention. His presence was subtle, unassuming, yet there was an air of competence about him that made her pause. "You're Emilia, right?" he asked, his voice low but steady, carrying a warmth that was rare in this competitive space. She looked up, startled, and then recognized the quiet confidence in his gaze. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "Do I know you?" He smiled faintly. "Not exactly. But we've crossed paths before." He hesitated, then added, almost as an afterthought, "Back home." "In school." Emilia's eyes narrowed slightly. She searched his face, trying to place him. And then it clicked: Ben, the quiet boy she had once helped anonymously. The one she had defended in small, unnoticed ways, whose potential she had recognized before anyone else. Her chest tightened, not with surprise, exactly, but with a sense of vindication. He had grown, matured, and here he was, successful in his own right. I remember," she said softly, a smile tugging at her lips. "I didn't expect to see you here." He shrugged, but his eyes were steady, kind. "I've been following your work. I knew it was you. You've done, well, everything I expected and more." Something warm spread through Emilia's chest, a rare feeling of connection that had nothing to do with obligation, guilt, or past loyalties. With Ben, there was mutual respect, understanding, and a sense of shared history that was untainted by manipulation or betrayal. Meanwhile, back home, the news Emilia received from her closest friend was less comforting. Lucas's life, once so bright with potential, had begun to unravel. Failed business ventures, massive debt, and a bitter breakup with Maya, the girl who had once seemed his entire world, left him staggering through life, directionless and bitter. Emilia absorbed the news quietly, her chest heavy but her resolve unshaken. She had made her choice, and he had made his. Even as her career flourished, she allowed herself brief moments of reflection. She remembered the boy who had once been her equal, the boy she had fought for in the shadows of her childhood, and she felt no regret for refusing to prop up his failing world. Instead, there was clarity: Lucas's downfall was not hers to fix, and her life, her future, was finally hers alone. One chilly evening, as she and Ben walked through a quiet street lined with old brick buildings, she felt the first stirrings of something entirely new: trust, partnership, and the quiet joy of being seen for who she truly was, without compromise or expectation. Ben didn't ask her to fix his problems, he didn't expect loyalty born of guilt. He simply valued her and she valued him. As they paused under a street lamp, the warm glow illuminating the rain-slicked cobblestones, Emilia realized something profound. Freedom, she thought, is not just about escape. It's about choosing your own path, building your own life, and letting others face the consequences of their choices. Lucas had chosen his path, and now she had chosen hers. The months in London passed quickly. Emilia's designs gained recognition, and she was invited to showcase her work in small exhibitions that drew attention from industry insiders. Each success was a quiet triumph, a testament to years of discipline and focus. And through it all, Ben was there, a steady presence, a reminder that connection and loyalty could exist without the chains of obligation or past mistakes. Yet, despite her successes and the warmth of this new life, Emilia never forgot the lessons she had learned. She kept a quiet vigilance, understanding that the past, no matter how far behind her, could echo into the present. Lucas's failures were a warning: brilliance without discipline, loyalty without respect, ambition without accountability, these were paths that led to ruin. And in that understanding, Emilia found not only solace but strength. She had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and the weight of her own past mistakes. She had emerged stronger, wiser, and capable of building a life entirely of her own making. For the first time, she felt truly untethered, and it was exhilarating. The air was heavy that evening, thick with the smell of rain on asphalt and the faint exhaust of buses rumbling down the streets of London. Emilia had just returned from a meeting at her studio, her coat damp from the drizzle, her mind already turning over sketches for her next collection. The streets were quieter than usual, the hum of the city subdued under the patter of rain. It was the perfect kind of evening to lose herself in thought, to savor the calm she had fought so hard to achieve. And then she saw him. Lucas stood at the edge of the street, a shadow among the dim street lamps, eyes locked on her as if he had been waiting for this moment for years. His hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, his face pale but taut with a strange intensity that made her stomach tighten. He looked smaller than she remembered, not in height but in control, an unraveling storm of pride, anger, and desperation. "Emilia," he called, voice raw and urgent. "We need to talk." Her hands instinctively clenched the strap of her bag. She didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. Every instinct honed from years of navigating her reborn life screamed at her to pause, to assess, to remember who she was now and who he had become. He stepped closer, eyes wild, and for a brief, terrifying moment, she almost felt pity. Almost. "I know you've been avoiding me," he said, his voice trembling between rage and desperation. "But I need you. I need us. We belong together, Emilia. You've always loved me, I know it. Those breakfasts, those nights you stayed up helping me, it was never for anyone else." Emilia's chest tightened, and for a moment, the old pain, the ache of betrayal, of misplaced loyalty flared. But she drew in a deep, steadying breath, letting the cold clarity she had cultivated these past months anchor her. "You're wrong," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the night like glass. "Those breakfasts, those nights, every bit of effort I ever put in, it wasn't for you. It was for someone who valued me. For someone I trusted. Not for you, Lucas." He froze, his mouth opening and closing, as if he couldn't believe the words, as if reality itself were betraying him. What do you mean?" His voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and anger. I remember." "You remember wrong," she interrupted, sharper this time, her hands gripping her bag so tightly her knuckles were white. "Everything you think you know about us, about me, is a lie. You were never my priority. You were never my equal in trust or loyalty. And now, after all your choices, after all your failures, you're standing here demanding what, exactly? Sympathy? Redemption? My interference?" He staggered slightly, a raw, unpolished desperation spilling out. I can't do this without you, Emilia. You're the only one who you can do this without me," she said, her voice calm, measured, unyielding. "You could have done it all along, but you chose differently. You chose shortcuts, distractions, arrogance. And now you face the consequences. I will not save you. I will not undo your choices. I will not let you manipulate my life for your gain." Lucas's expression twisted, a mixture of fury and humiliation. He looked as though he might attack, to yell, to plead, to do anything to bend her will to his. Instead, his hands dropped, and a strange, hollow sound left him, a laugh, bitter and defeated. You really mean it," he whispered, almost to himself. "I do," she said. "And if you think for 1 second that you can claim me, that you can rewrite the past, you're wrong. Completely wrong. I built a life, Lucas. I built it without you. And you? You've burned every bridge that mattered, including the one we could have had." He stumbled back, shoulders shaking, his mind struggling to reconcile the girl he had once known loyal, devoted, bending over backwards to protect him with the woman standing before him, unyielding, self-possessed, utterly untouchable. And in that moment, the first cracks in his composure broke entirely. Why his voice faltered, and he turned on his heel, retreating into the shadows of the street, leaving Emilia standing alone in the rain. The echoes of his presence lingered like a warning. Desperation untempered by discipline can turn monstrous. But she didn't flinch. She didn't move. She was unmoved because she had learned the value of boundaries, the importance of self-respect, and the power of clarity. Later, as she recounted the confrontation to Ben, who had arrived shortly after her call for support, she felt a strange sense of closure. Lucas's delusion, his insistence on rewriting their shared history, had revealed everything about him: entitlement, obsession, inability to face consequences. And more importantly, it had revealed everything about her: resilience, independence, and the unshakable strength of someone who had finally claimed her own life. London hummed quietly around them, the rain now a soft mist, and Emilia realized that the monster standing before her, Lucas, with all his brilliance twisted by arrogance and desire, was nothing compared to the life she was building. The truth, harsh and unyielding, had set her free. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to look back. Emilia sat in her London apartment, the soft golden light of sunset spilling across the hardwood floor, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. The city was alive outside the window, buses rumbling, pedestrians hurrying past, the distant clang of a tram, but inside, the silence was heavy, weighted with something she could not yet name. It had started with rumors, whispers filtered through friends back home, failed businesses, debts mounting higher than anyone had expected, breakdowns, desperate attempts to reclaim a life he had already squandered. At first, Emilia had absorbed them with detached curiosity. She had expected consequences, yes, but not the depth of chaos that seemed to follow Lucas wherever he went. Then came Ben. Quiet, methodical, always observant. After hearing about Lucas's increasingly erratic behavior and his recent attempt to manipulate social media into painting himself as a victim, he had begun investigating not out of curiosity, but out of concern for Emilia. And what he found shattered every assumption she had held about Lucas, about the past, and about the people she had thought she knew. The first revelation came in the form of official documents, letters, and old news clippings that Ben had quietly pieced together. Lucas's family, the people she had assumed to be humble, struggling, altruistic, were not as poor as they had claimed. The scholarship Lucas had received to attend school under her parents' sponsorship had been intended for another boy entirely, Ben. Her chest tightened, disbelief clashing with dawning horror. That can't be," she murmured, voice barely audible. "It doesn't make sense." "He couldn't." "Yes, he could," Ben said quietly, his expression grim. "I checked everything. And it gets worse." Emilia felt the cold seep into her bones. "Worse?" she whispered. Ben nodded. "When he was younger, before the scholarship was offered, the original candidate, my family was in the running. Your parents were looking to help someone truly deserving. But Lucas, he made sure the slot went to him." Emilia's hands clenched around her teacup. "Made sure?" she echoed. "What do you mean?" Ben's eyes darkened. "He followed his mother one afternoon, pushed her into the river. Made it look like an accident. With her gone, and no one to claim the scholarship, he took the slot, using your family's sympathy and generosity to secure a future that wasn't his to take." The words hit her like a physical blow, her stomach dropping, nausea twisting through her chest. She remembered Lucas not as he was now, but as the boy she had defended, the prodigy she had believed in. Every act of kindness she had shown, every sleepless night, every sacrifice it had been given to someone who was capable of cold, calculated cruelty. "No," she breathed. He wasn't corrupted by love. He was always a monster," Ben finished for her, his tone careful but firm. "From the beginning." Emilia leaned back, letting the weight of the revelation settle. It was like the ground beneath her had shifted. All the doubts, all the betrayals, the way he had abandoned her loyalty, the cruelty with Maya, the manipulation, the obsession, they suddenly made sense. The boy she had tried to save, the one she had once loved in a protective, quiet way, had been born capable of destruction. Not corrupted by circumstance, not twisted by infatuation, he had always been capable of it. Her mind spun, running through memories in a new, horrifying light. The bullying he had endured? Perhaps a mask he wore to elicit sympathy. His brilliance? A tool for manipulation. The defiance, the arrogance, the cold dismissal of her loyalty, all symptoms of someone who had never valued anyone but himself. And yet, even with this revelation, Emilia felt no triumph. There was no satisfaction in knowing the depths of his malice, only clarity. She understood now why her past interventions, her loyalty, her sacrifices had been meaningless. She realized that the life she had painstakingly built abroad, the strength she had cultivated, and the independence she had claimed were all necessary. Without them, she could have been consumed by someone who had never deserved her trust. Ben reached across the table, placing a steady hand over hers. "You can't change what he did," he said softly, "but you can protect yourself. And you can make sure he can't hurt anyone else." Emilia nodded, a grim resolve settling over her like armor. "We'll make sure of that," she said. "He needs to face justice, not just for me, but for everyone he's harmed along the way." And in that moment, she felt the full weight of her rebirth, the culmination of the lessons she had learned. Loyalty is precious, but not blind. Love is a choice, not a tool, and sometimes, the people we think we know are capable of darkness beyond imagination. The storm that had haunted her life was finally understood. Lucas's descent, his obsession, his cruelty, they were not accidents, not the results of love gone wrong. They were the natural consequences of a life rooted in deception and malice. And Emilia, finally seeing the full picture, felt a rare, unshakable peace. She would not be a pawn. She would not be a victim. She would act, deliberately and decisively, to ensure that the past could no longer threaten her future. Lucas's true nature had been revealed. And with that revelation came freedom. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a sterile reminder of order in a world that had long seemed chaotic to Emilia. She sat in the gallery, hands folded calmly in her lap, watching as Lucas was led forward in handcuffs. The man who had haunted her past, whose brilliance had once been a mirror of her own, now looked small, diminished, and utterly exposed. The courtroom was quiet but tense. Reporters jostled for position, cameras clicking, capturing the drama of the moment. For a brief instant, Emilia felt the old surge of anxiety: public attention, confrontation, the gnawing question of whether justice would truly be served. But the calm she had nurtured over the years, the independence she had carved out in London, held her steady. Lucas's trial had been swift once the evidence was submitted. Ben had compiled meticulous documentation, proof of his family's deception, historical records showing the scholarship was never meant for him, and damning accounts of his involvement in the death of the original candidate's mother. Emilia had watched every step quietly, letting the system do what her previous interventions never could. When the judge's voice finally rang out, declaring Lucas guilty and sentencing him to life imprisonment for murder and fraud, Emilia felt a profound sense of release. It wasn't triumph in the petty sense, nor vindictive joy. It was clarity: the world was set right in its own way, and she was finally free to move forward without the shadow of him ever looming over her again. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp and clear. Autumn sunlight danced across the pavement, catching the edges of falling leaves. Emilia inhaled deeply, feeling the tension that had gripped her for years drain from her body. She had faced the past, confronted its darkness, and survived. And now, she could finally step into the life she had built on her own terms. Ben appeared beside her, calm, steady, and quietly reassuring. He didn't reach for her hand immediately. He didn't need to. She already knew he was there, a partner in every sense of the word. "It's over," he said softly, his gaze warm and unwavering. Emilia nodded, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "It's finally over," she admitted, the words tasting sweet and liberating. I can't believe it's really done." Ben's hand found hers then, fingers intertwining naturally, a quiet promise of steadiness and support. "It is," he said. "And now, you can focus on what matters: your life, your work, and the future you've earned." They walked together through the streets of London, the city alive with possibilities, the scent of coffee and rain mingling in the air. Emilia felt lighter than she had in years, unburdened by the past, unbound by guilt, and free from anyone else's control. Every step reinforced her own strength, the life she had meticulously crafted, and the love that had grown between her and Ben: a love built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding, not obligation or manipulation. Weeks later, Emilia stood in her studio, overseeing the final fittings for her latest collection. Each dress, each cut of fabric, reflected her vision, her determination, and the countless hours of discipline she had devoted to this life. She felt a quiet pride in her work, knowing that every success, every accolade, was the fruit of her effort alone. A knock at the door drew her attention, and Ben entered with a small, thoughtful smile. "You've done it again," he said quietly, setting a cup of tea on her desk. "And you've done it without losing yourself along the way." Emilia leaned back in her chair, letting herself relax fully for the first time in years. "I've learned," she said softly, "that loyalty has limits. That love doesn't mean sacrifice to the point of self-erasure. And that some people are beyond saving." Ben nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. "And yet, you found someone who deserves it," he said gently. "Someone who sees you, truly sees you." Her eyes softened, and she allowed herself a rare laugh, light and unburdened. "Yes," she admitted. "And I'll never take that for granted." Life moved forward, as it always does. Emilia's career flourished, her name became synonymous with bold, uncompromising design, her work celebrated internationally. Ben's steady presence remained, a constant reminder that connection and loyalty could exist without cost or compromise. And sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, Emilia thought of Lucas not with fear, not with pain, but with detached clarity. The boy who had once been her rival, her companion, and her tormentor had revealed himself fully, and the consequences had been absolute. She had no lingering doubts, no unfinished business. The past no longer had power over her. Years later, Emilia and Ben would walk hand in hand through the streets of London, a city that had witnessed her transformation, her triumph, and her liberation. They would build a life together, full of warmth, respect, and shared dreams, a life that was entirely their own. Emilia often thought back to her rebirth, to the life she had lived differently this time. Every choice, every refusal to interfere, every act of self-preservation had led her here. She had honored herself, and in doing so, she had found true freedom. The past, with all its shadows and mistakes, was finally behind her. And for the first time in years, Emilia smiled not because she had defeated someone else, but because she had finally found peace.